You're listening to the ATS Breathe Easy podcast, brought to you by the American Thoracic Society.
Welcome to the ATS Breathe Easy podcast. This is our series on what you may have missed at ATS 2025. I'm your host, Dr. Erica Moseson, a pulmonary and critical care medicine physician in Portland, Oregon. And I'm here with Dr. Adam Soloff of the University of Pittsburgh, who's presenting his work here titled Inhaled Microplastics Inhibit Tissue Maintenance Functions of Pulmonary Macrophages. And he will be presenting this at the ATS session, Macrophages, the Pac-Man of the Immune System.
I did love that. I thought that was great because I will describe them to my family as the Pac-Man, they go around. Bop, 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 bop.
So why don't you tell us about yourself and how you became interested in this topic and how you became an immunologist?
Yeah, so my name's Adam, and I've been an immunologist since I was, a young scientist, and I've been interested in pulmonary immunity, right? And particularly macrophages, how macrophages respond to our environment. So kind of all the environmental exposures minus cigarettes, right? And particularly how those exposures can epigenetically tweak, maladapt, regulate our macrophages, right? So the story we're talking about today is on microplastics, and I have to be completely honest. This was not something on my radar as of like a year and a half ago. We were studying military exposures like burn pits on the veteran side. On the university side, we look at sex-based differences. So females, young women who are getting lung cancer at increasingly high rates, and no one knows why, right? So to me, immunologist, it's got to be immune-mediated, probably the MACs because they're the most important cell. As an immunologist, you have to pick a favorite cell. Like it's part of getting your
your
immunology
team MAC.
card. Yes, definitely. Well, they're Pac-Men, right? So we were looking at sex-based differences, and I'm a PhD, so I'm a lab rat, and I jokingly refer to myself as a buddy team, a lab rat and a cutter. Well, my cutter, a surgeon, cardiothoracic surgeon, Raj Dupar, is amazing. If you ever see him, give him a big hug, give him Raj. He's a wonderful human being. He got interested in this, and he brought it up. And he goes, microplastics. What do you know about them? I'm like, I don't know. They're in the fish. They're in the water. Bad news. So he really started pushing. He's like, we should look into this. This is an exposure that's everywhere. And what do you know about it? What do we know about it? And so begrudgingly, I'm like, okay, well, let's run some experiments. Let's get some plastics. Let's start checking it out. And we've already been doing this on like diesel particulate, PFAS, different chemicals, PM 2.5, things like that. So it was just adding another to the mix, kind of, right? And every step of the way, when I'm like, these are going to be boring. Like, whatever, man, plastics.
They're inert, plastic.
Right, macrophage eats it, it goes away or something, right? And every step of the way, it wasn't, right? And so time and time again in the lab, I'm like, Raj was right. And we keep on going with this. So as we've built up steam, we've gone from cells, mouse cells, to patient cells, to in vivo mouse exposures. Now we're looking at our patient lung tissues. We have a microarray of about 180, 190 patients, lung cancer, and so both the tumor and the paired, and we're examining that for exposure. And I'm begrudgingly convinced that these things are uniquely bad in a way that we haven't appreciated. And I told you I work at my little brother then calls me the Lorax of the thorax because, speaking about this, basically this ever-present, ubiquitous threat that we all live with and that we don't understand.
Absolutely. How do you define microplastics? Like, I think we all have an idea of what they are, right? But how do you define them from a research standpoint and understand when you've found them and are researching them?
So in my house, anything small is plastic is bad. So you'd see little shavings. To me, I'd consider that. Like technically, a microplastic is under 5 millimeters, and a nanoplastic is 1 micrometer or smaller, right? So we get lots of that. So you think about, when do you ever get a plastic that was actually made? They can be called primaries. So they're made for certain purposes. But normally we get these plastics because things are breaking down, right? So you have your water bottle, you have your baby bottle, you have plastic bags, you have PVC pipe, everything we touch, so much of it, right? So that gets rubbed against, or it gets UV light exposure, it gets so physical disruption, chemical, biodegradation, degradable. So bacteria can eat things. So what you get is these smaller particles, and that's one bit of the problem, right? Like our body doesn't need foreign particles in it, right? I don't think. Well, not like that. And then the other bit is that they're not just inert. Like originally I thought the same thing, whatever, little plastic balls, right? But they're not. They absorb all these chemicals. Some are from the manufacturing process. So things like phthalates and what is it? Not the BPA, but and then toxins, toxic heavy metals. They can regulate estrogen. They can disrupt, they are neurotoxic, they're carcinogenic. So now you have these little particles, which that's one thing. What does that do to our system? But now they're bringing in all these chemicals, and that's a completely different one, right? So
Kind of as carrier particles. Like we worry that PM 2.5 sometimes can be, particulates can be carrying other things into our lungs when we inhale them.
that's exactly it, right? So they have hydrophobic and electrostatic interactions. They bind these chemicals, so now it's not just that little plastic ball, but it's the plastic ball coated in carcinogen. And that's in your gut, that's in your lungs, that's on your skin. I know, it's terrifying, isn't it?
And so what do we know? So we're here at American Thoracic Society, obviously, with the Lorax of the thorax. I'm very interested in our lungs and everything. But you mentioned working with a cardiothoracic surgeon. So what do we know about how microplastics affect human health in other organ systems?
So little, right? And I think the most established evidence now is in the cardiovascular world, right? So they found evidence of plastics and atherosclerotic plaques. They are in the macrophages, go Max, in the atherosclerotic plaques.
They're trying to protect us and they're trying to eat them, but they're just choking to death on those little plastics. Is that what you think?
They are, they are. There's actually a phenomenon in tattooing where the tattoo pigment goes in, the macrophage eats it, right? And then becomes basically anergic and then dies. And then another macrophage eats it to try to, it's continually like throwing yourself on a sword. They're just trying to save you. Oh. So I think that might happen in the plaques too. But they found plastic-laden MACs in the plaques. And that has been associated with worse outcomes. Now that's about the best clinical evidence that we have. And even that, you can raise, I think that's an awesome study. But there's
worse outcomes like heart attacks, strokes, or cardiovascular perfusion sort of thing.
All-cause mortality, right?
So dropping dead, that's pretty bad.
Yep. But I mean, these were individuals who already had disease. But of course, further study needs to be done. So, what does it mean for lung? So there have been studies that found, microplastics, nanoplastics in lung tissue, in bronchoalveolar lavage, and sputum. They found it in colon, breast milk, placenta, liver, everywhere. If you look, you're gonna find it there, right? What does it do?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. It's reminding me of the studies where we look at, black carbon inhaled, and you can look at the cells in the lungs and look at clinical outcomes, where you see that kids who living closer to a freeway have more of it, and then they're more likely to have respiratory complaints. It's giving me chills that we may be finding yet another threat to our health in the air we breathe.
That's really, so as I'm, again, slowly becoming convinced of the impacts, right? The epidemiology, and when I think about cancer, right? So one of the big, to me, this major question, or maybe the biggest question in my mind, is why are young people getting different cancers? So young women who don't smoke getting lung cancer, young people getting colorectal cancer, breast cancer is up in younger people, right? So this is too quick to be a genetic thing, right?
I wonder about obesity.
Totally, obesity, lifestyle, sedentary things, but what other factors? And it's global. Right? So, countries like Japan see increased incidence in younger people getting cancer, not quite the same epidemic of obesity that we have, right? So, why, right? I have two theories. One is the internet, right? Is that we are all, and not like the internet's like freaking out our brains and like giving us cellular cancer, right? But we're just stressed, right? And we're like constantly on, I'm checking
Which
emails.
affects our immune system.
Exactly, it's got it. Those Macs are stressed and they're not doing their job. So I think that might be our connectivity and our pace of life, and that is something that's new. But plastics, they were developed in the early 1900s. They became common after World War II, like 1945. Oh, the fun facts for the talk, right? We produce 450 million tons of plastics every year. That's as much as every adult human on Earth weighs, right?
Wow.
So we pump that out every year. It's something like 7 billion tons since we've been making plastics, and 80% of that still here. It's accumulated in the environment, right? So now we're talking about an exposure that's increasing, and that's happened since the 40s. So now you get young people, higher doses, dosed from conception. You're
Intrauterine,
you're
yeah.
a little baby in placenta,
Yeah.
right? So now you have these exposures, which we didn't have 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Our grandparents wouldn't have had these exposures. Is that the smoking gun? Like, I have no idea. And at first, again, skeptical. And it's good to be skeptical as a researcher, right? Like, you gotta be like, that's...
But now you just walk around paranoid about the air you breathe.
Yeah, I mean, I have instead of my plastic bubble, I now have a glass bubble that is more of a
Stainless
hamster
steel.
that I roll around in.
Why don't you tell us about your study that you're presenting here at ATS and what you found?
Yeah, so terrifying. Yeah, so we used polystyrene microplastics of different sizes. So 10 microns. So that's still a microplastic, but very small, down to 0.02 microns. We wanted to see what they did to macrophages, mouse macrophages and human macrophages. We wanted to see what they did in vivo. I will preface that these are not what we get exposed to in life, right? This is a very controlled, the reason we went this route is they're fluorescently labeled. So it makes it very easy to tell this plastic from the one that's in my pipette tip or that's in the cell culture plate, right? So it made for a nice clean starting point for experiments. What we find is, so the macrophages can't break apart the plastics. This goes back to them being inert. So you can put them in different acidic environments, does nothing. The lysosome does nothing, so they concentrate, right? We believe this leads to a phenomenon called frustrated phagocytosis, right? The mac's entire reason to live is to eat and digest things. Like, that's what it loves. And if it eats something and it can't digest it, that's like an existential crisis for this macrophage, right? So it freaks out and it makes reactive oxygen species, it pumps out inflammatory cytokines, and eventually it dies. And that's what we're seeing, right? So we did an in vivo experiment, and it's not the cleanest. We did intranasal, so we can't rule out that these plastics don't go some to the gut through the esophagus, right? But intranasal delivery of 1 micron plastics. The reason we went small is because, like PM2.5, we know that a particle of that size can go right through the alveoli, get into the circulation, right? So we put in these fluorescent microplastics, 30 million, which sounds like a lot, but it's about the size of a quarter of a grain of sand into a mouse, right? Then we looked at the lungs, the liver, the kidney, the heart, the spleen, the colon, the brain. That was horrible. I'd never wanted to take brain, and I had to learn to take brain. So we looked at all these tissues, and sure enough, we see tons of deposition in the lung, up to a week, right? So 1 day, 3 days, 1 week. It's still there. It's both intracellular and extracellular in the tissue environment. But the terrifying bit is we found it in the brain, and we found it in the colon, and we found it in the spleen and liver. We found it everywhere we looked. And just to double check, we did flow cytometry on these tissues for the fluorescent particle. We did microscopy to identify these particles. So one way or another, putting this stuff in the nose got to the brain, putting it in the nose got to the colon and the liver and the heart. And we started modeling that in precision cut lung slices from our patients, right? To look at, can we regulate this? Oh, geez, that might be the most exciting thing, is part of the damage is bioenergetic, right? So the microplastics decrease mitochondrial mass, they decrease mitochondrial function, and we can revert that. So we found that if we add an AMP activating agent, right, which is commonly used in cycling doping.
Okay.
So, bioenergetics, pretty good thing.
Okay.
But if we add this, we can actually resuscitate the macs post or during their plastic exposure, because it just boosts their mitochondrial function. So now they can wound heal better and they can eat and digest things again. Not perfect, right? But so I might have to run a trial dosing humans with doping agents. I don't know how we're going to do this. We're still working on that.
And they'll bike like crazy.
Yeah, right.
So how many people inhale microplastics in the world? Is this just out in all the dust, or are there things you can do to decrease it, or is it just out there?
So yes, right? It's just much like PM2.5, smaller particles are going to be aerosolized. So they're going to be things that you just breathe in the wind. There are also microplastics that are shed by our clothes or when we're doing laundry, or your face mask has microplastics.
I
right?
don't have a face mask.
Oh, well, if you had a face mask, put
You're
on your
saying I need a
surgical
face
mask.
mask?
No,
Oh,
but if
surgical
you have
face
a
mask.
surgical
Got it.
mask, right?
Oh, yeah, that's
going to shed
interesting. Wow,
microplastics,
okay.
right? So how do we, I think what I've started doing is just being mindful in my environment, like my water bottle's metal. I have thrown out those takeout containers, which I love to use at my house because they're easy for kids and things like that. So now no plastics. So making some of those, the cutting board is now wood. Things like that. But what can we do? I mean, you stay out of dust storms.
Yeah.
I don't know what we can do yet. I really don't. And maybe part of it's, can we identify the magnitude of the problem, or mechanistically on the cellular and physiologic level? What can that inform mitigation strategies? I think ultimately this could be more of a public policy intervention that needs to be made. So
yeah, just moving away from having plastic everywhere.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath for that one.
Yeah.
So
Well, we'll see. Sometimes there's a lot of hope in state and local action when people are skeptical of other interventions. You can kind of come together as communities potentially.
Yeah. And actually, I'm kind of encouraged by some of the industry actions to make plastics that are, biodegradable, that break down. So the first generation plastics broke down over centuries. So now, we're years to decades. But it's a huge improvement, right? When you think about 80% of the plastic that has ever been made by humans is still here.
Yeah. It's really scary.
Totally. So.
So obviously, this is a study in cells, but we touched on this a little bit. So it sounds like even though we're still kind of at the cellular and tissue level, it's really made you rethink your own life changes. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think, when we started studying environmental exposures, their influence on pulmonary immunity, I did consider, we have those wildfire days in the States, I don't mind wearing a mask. It's one of those things, should we be introducing this more into our daily routines? If I'm concerned, I'll send the kids out the door with masks, things like that, right? And trying to limit, limit exposures to plastics. I was psyched I went an electric car. That was pretty awesome. I don't know what that does too much, but so yeah, I think making these, and we make our small changes. As I said, when I got on a plane and came from Pittsburgh to here, and I'm like, oh, everything I just did was undone.
Yeah.
But making small lifestyle choices, I think, is our immediate way to protect ourselves, our loved ones, our community. And maybe that gains momentum, and
And I think, just not just being okay with it's okay to learn new things and change as we go along in life. It's not that, everything has to have been set the way it was when we were children.
Yeah.
We can make things better.
Think about the great advantages in plastic, right? I mean, we go into the lab just having the convenience of, contaminated and infectious samples and things like that. So we have to learn to better live with the good parts and the bad parts and make those changes, right?
Yeah, and kind of understand, that's why the science is important, to actually understand the risks and benefits so you can scale your response rather than just freaking out about everything.
Yeah, I'm still freaking out about everything.
I know, exactly. Well, that's not healthy. It stresses out your macrophages, I heard.
No, it seems 2025 hasn't been a great year to not freak out about everything, so.
Well, thank you very much for your time and your science and everything. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for sitting down and talking to me. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I love the ATS. I'm excited to be more a part of it. But thank you. This was terrific.
Of course. Well, thanks for being here.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more, visit our website at thoracic.org. Find more ATS Breathe Easy podcasts on Transistor, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a show.